made the decision to release as much of a photo that we had at the time. We sent it across the country, and someone, a McDonald's employee, did something we ask every American to do. If you see something, say something, but most importantly, do something. And they did. And because of that, we believe we have a strong person of interest to deal with this case. I want to now turn it over to the Police Commissioner of the City of New York, Commissioner Tisch.
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, everyone. Earlier this morning in Altoona, Pennsylvania, members of the Altoona Police Department arrested Luigi Mangione, a 26-year-old male, on firearms charges. At this time, he is believed to be our person of interest in the brazen targeted murder of Brian Thompson, CEO of UnitedHealthcare, last Wednesday in Midtown Manhattan. The suspect was in a McDonald's and was recognized by an employee who then called local police. Responding officers questioned the suspect, who was acting suspiciously and was carrying multiple fraudulent IDs as well as a U.S. passport. Upon further investigation, officers recovered a firearm on his person as well as a suppressor, both consistent with the weapon used in the murder. They also recovered clothing, including a mask consistent with those worn by our wanted individual. Also recovered was a fraudulent New Jersey ID, matching the ID our suspect used to check into his New York City hostel before the shooting incident. Additionally, officers recovered a handwritten document that speaks to both his motivation and mindset. NYPD detectives are en route to Pennsylvania
As law enforcement just announced, a man is under arrest in Pennsylvania. Police say he has a gun consistent with the weapon used to kill UnitedHealthcare CEO in Midtown Manhattan last week. At this point, he is a person of interest being questioned. Officers in Pennsylvania took 26-year-old Luigi Mangione into custody for an unrelated incident in the city of Altoona, which is roughly 2 hours east of Pittsburgh. A source says he was spotted at a McDonald's. An employee is the one who called local police to tip them off. We're also told he was carrying fake IDs, including one from New Jersey that was consistent with the one that he used to check into a New York City hostel the week of the murder. New York City Mayor Eric Adams says he is a strong person of interest in the case. Anna Schecter has been following this case for us. She joins me in Studio 57. Anna is the senior coordinating producer for our CBS News Crime and Public Safety Unit. A lot of information, Anna, was given in that press conference. For anybody who's just joining us, help catch us up to speed on some of the top lines.
Well, we knew this morning that the person of interest had gotten into a bus about a half an hour after he carried out the attack, and we didn't know where he went. But earlier today, Altoona police got a call from a local McDonald's that somebody that matched the description that they had seen on the news was actually there eating inside the McDonald's. The local police came quickly, apprehended him, brought him in for questioning. What did they find? A ghost gun with a silencer, a gun capable of firing a 9mm round. That's all we can report at this time. In addition to that ghost gun, also a fake New Jersey ID, the same one that the person of interest used to check into the hostel. Also, a 3-page handwritten manifesto listing grievances against the healthcare industry. All of this, when you pool this together with the monopoly money found in the backpack, the words deny, delay, and depose written on the bullet casings that were recovered at the scene, all this points to a motive, a person angry about the healthcare insurance industry. This is a young man here, 26 years old, a Penn graduate. That's the University of Pennsylvania, an Ivy League school. His most recent address was in Hawaii, but he graduated from Penn in 2020. He grew up in the Baltimore area. So this is someone of a privileged background, well-educated. So this will be sending shockwaves across those communities at that time. Still a lot of questions to be answered.
Right. I mean, about those questions, we heard reporters shouting questions at law enforcement. A lot of what we heard was this is still an active investigation. It is believed at this point in the investigation that he acted alone. that he did show an ill will toward corporate America. That was sort of the most detail that we got about maybe those handwritten writings or interactions with police. But there are still so many questions about how he knew, for example, that Brian Thompson would be at that exact location, going in that exact door at that exact time. I mean, there's still so much for investigators to piece together, and his movements before and after.
Why did he home in and target this particular CEO at this particular location? What was that drove him to that? Lots of questions we are looking at, and investigators have been combing through. There were so many tips that came in. They were running down profiles on multiple names. So they were wading through a sea of tips, also hundreds of hours, thousands of hours of surveillance footage. So that takes time. And there's a reason why this took some time. And there's a reason why the FBI and the NYPD were asking the public to help. That actually is, in fact, ultimately the reason why police were able to apprehend him, is somebody saw him, realized he matched the photos that had been put out. And
somebody not in New York City.
That's right. Not in New York City, but not that far away. There were concerns that this would become an international manhunt because so much time had passed, and that becomes a much more complex operation. He stayed relatively close to New York City. He was in the Northeast. He had been traveling by bus, so that, you know, he didn't jump on an airplane, which would have also complicated things.
But he had a passport on him.
He had a passport. And our earlier reporting indicated multiple fake IDs. So he had really planned this, prepared for this. What's interesting to me is that this is a person who doesn't appear to have like a lengthy military background, but who could stay pretty calm. You know, the experts that we were talking to, watching that footage of him actually firing the shot, said, well, it doesn't look like a professional hitman. But he had some facility with the gun, and he could stay relatively calm.
And wherewithal when it jammed.
Yes, and fix that jam and fire off another round, really done in cold blood. We've reviewed the video, and it was at least 3 shots. The victim was stumbling, and then he continued this horrific attack in cold blood.
Let's go ahead and bring in CBS News correspondent Tom Hanson, who joins us now outside at New York City Hall. Tom, what more are we learning about this person of interest and what charges he may face?
Yeah, well, as you heard in that press conference, Lindsay, he's going to be facing charges in Pennsylvania. Also, he's going to be facing extradition back here to New York. One of the key things that authorities are going to be looking into is, of course, the weapon that he used to murder CEO Brian Thompson. We heard that it was a ghost gun. That means that there is likely no serial number. It's going to be very difficult to trace. One of the interesting things about that that you heard in that press conference, they said that it could have been 3D printed. So he could have actually manufactured this gun himself. We don't know that for sure, but it would definitely align with the resolve that he had in a targeted killing like the one that we saw several days ago. So there's still a lot of information that we are learning. We're also going to presumably learn exactly how he got to Altoona, Pennsylvania. That was something that authorities were not specific on. A lot of details coming out of that press conference, but a huge moment today in this sprawling investigation. We saw that the investigation fanned out as far as Atlanta, Georgia, and a key development in Altoona, Pennsylvania today. Lindsay?
Tom Hanson, I spoke with Rich Esposito, formerly of the NYPD. He said that the daunting task of taking all that camera footage from New York City and trying to piece together his movements, it is such a tiresome task. Hundreds of officers working so many hours. He said he could see the wariness on law enforcement today. What are New York officials saying about this arrest?
Yeah, I mean, well, basically what we heard in that press conference once again was when asked about a key linchpin in this investigation, authorities said that there wasn't just one linchpin. This was an enormous operation by NYPD and coordinated operation by authorities, multi-state in this investigation. So, you know, what we're going to find out is that this was something where they had to parse through so many hours of footage, so many videos and photos on social media. What they did credit was that one video of him pulling down his mask and smiling at the hostel, that was a key bit of evidence for people to see and to identify him. But, this is just an enormous investigation, multi-day, multi-state, and authorities presumably have found the suspect that they've been looking for. We'll find out more as NYPD goes to Altoona, Pennsylvania to give him a line of questioning and presumably bring him back to New York at some point.
Tom Hanson, thank you. Let's bring in CBS News legal expert and analyst Rikki Klieman for more on this. I mean, Rikki, from a legal standpoint, all of this information that we are learning, really just a waterfall of information on what law enforcement has been able to piece together. What is your reaction?
Well, my reaction is one not of surprise for two reasons. Number one, I have a great deal of faith in the NYPD as well as the FBI. And number two, I really do believe that pushing out those photographs, they were so important to alert the public, and that the public understands that when you see something, you ought to say something. So here you simply have what sounds to be like a patron in a McDonald's who says, that looks like the guy. And that's really what it takes. It takes great law enforcement coordination, and it takes the public to be a partner.
We know that Mangione is still a person of interest in this case being questioned. If that escalates and he becomes a suspect, what sort of charges is he likely to face?
Well, we're certainly going to see him face a murder charge in New York, and he will be extradited on that charge from Pennsylvania to New York. They may add additional charges because of the firearm, because of the flight, but ultimately we're going to look at the top count, which is, in fact, that murder. And when you're dealing with someone who commits a murder that is premeditated and he lays in wait, that is something where you're going to find someone who may be spending the rest of his days behind a prison cell.
Rikki, what happens between now, when a person is still considered a person of interest being questioned, and when a person becomes a suspect? Is it everything that they were talking about from fingerprints and DNA testing? What happens right now?
It becomes when you're looking at it at this stage, although he is being called a person of interest, we all know in this situation he is a suspect. What will happen is that when the NYPD officers or detectives come to Pennsylvania to question him, he is certainly going to have to be advised of his rights, his Miranda warnings. And at that point, he has the right to claim an attorney and a right to remain silent. At that point, or he has a right to talk if he would like to talk. That is going to be the point when he turns from a person of interest to a suspect and, of course, to a criminal defendant.
Rikki, as someone with a defense attorney background, what would be some of the challenges here if you were representing this person as a client in terms of missteps? I mean, the fact that Mangione was carrying a firearm consistent with the weapon used in the killing of Thompson, that there were handwritten writings that expressed ill will toward corporate America, that there were fraudulent IDs, including the one that was used to check into the hostel. The fact that in this high-profile case in which there is a multi-state manhunt, this person is sitting in a McDonald's eating a meal.
What you have here is a situation which defense lawyers like to call there are facts beyond change. There are facts in this case that you cannot make them go away. They're there. So your duty as a defense lawyer is twofold. Number one, is there a deal available in any way, shape, or form for this defendant, when he becomes a defendant, to be able, if there were other people involved, to be able to say that there might be a plea deal. On the other side of that, the defense lawyer has an ethical obligation to defend this client zealously. And it looks like the facts are pretty overwhelming when you look at the evidence as it piles up into this mountain. So is there a mental illness defense, which would be something that certainly the defense lawyer would have to consider? You also have to think about the fact that this is a young man who may have been playing some kind of a game. We also know that he teased the police with what he wrote on those cartridges and bullets with the words of deny or depose or defend. We have someone who teased people with these photographs, who dropped a bag, his backpack, and it had Monopoly money in there. Is that going to help you in terms of creating a mental health defense, or is that all going to continue to hurt you? But the defense lawyer has his or her work cut out for them.
Rikki, I do want to ask the significance of the weapon here, in which law enforcement are referring it to it as a ghost gun that may have been made on a 3D printer. We've reported, CBS News has reported, capable of firing a 9mm round consistent with the casings found at the site of the killing. What is the significance of the fact that it was a ghost gun, that could have been made on a 3D printer?
Well, if it certainly turns out that this is a ghost gun made on a 3D printer, and they can show that this is the person who made that gun, it goes right back to his premeditation. It also is, I'm sorry to say, a rather sad statement about our society at this point.
Rikki Klieman, certainly appreciate all of your time and expertise. Thank you. I want to bring in Anna Schecter back into the conversation. Anna, we've been reporting how difficult it is as the hours and days go on to locate and apprehend a suspect or person of interest. In this case, the person of interest sort of had time on his side, 5 days. Have your sources been talking to you about the challenges increasing exponentially as the days dragged on?
Well, certainly, because it just expands the area where he could have traveled to. And that's why getting those photos out to a national audience and potentially internationally, we were asking about going north. There was a concern about him going into Canada. There was that heightened concern even on the first day. The nearby airports were cased by NYPD investigators within hours of the attack. They were searching that. Long Island Railroad trains had been stopped. And when nothing was coming up, obviously that sort of upped the ante. And that's when the decision was made to put out those photos and ask the public for help. Because historically, that can be crucial to these kinds of investigations. You know, we think that we don't have any agency, that our faces everywhere because of facial recognition. But what this case shows us is that, you know, you do have a certain amount of agency, and he made mistakes, but he also did some things right by the way that he moved so quickly in order to disguise his movements.
It certainly is harder to identify somebody who is wearing a mask where only your eyes are visible. We do have that photo from that one flirtatious encounter at the hospital with the clerk in which he was smiling. But those two photos are the only full-face photos that we have, the photos in the cab, outside the cab, all with a mask.
And it's also challenging. I mean, the photos of him inside the Starbucks looked a little bit different from him in the hostel. And you had sort of citizen sleuths saying, wait a minute, it doesn't look like the same person. Then later, after he committed the crime, you have a photo of him getting into a cab. This goes to his premeditation. He took the ski mask off. It appears to me that he changed his jacket and he put a surgical mask on. So at every point, he was working to evade detection, and it worked for 5 days. But harnessing the public's help was crucial in this case.
Is it your understanding and that of law enforcement that the idea of getting onto an e-bike that was not a city bike, which is a brand, I don't know if it was his personal e-bike, got on the e-bike, sort of traveled through Central Park, exiting on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, then getting into a cab to Port Authority? Are all of those movements sort of in design to evade?
Well, those movements, he clearly knew exactly where he was going. And from my reporting based on the surveillance video, he wasn't sort of hesitating and wondering where he should go. He planned this whole thing out. So he went into the alleyway right after the shooting, grabbed the bike, and was pedaling. And, you know, the video that we obtained exclusively initially, where he's riding down 85th Street, he is pedaling hard, but he appears calm. There's nothing that looks out of the ordinary. And that he is not acting erratically in any way. And that helped him evade detection because he wasn't drawing attention to himself. So at all those points, not drawing attention to himself, even going to the McDonald's and just sitting there quietly eating, it seemed that he was getting a little bit more brazen. The NYPD said on Friday that the entire time he was staying at the hostel, he was wearing a mask. And, you know, he didn't interact with his roommates. He was careful at that point to take off the mask and then start eating. He assumed that he was safe inside that McDonald's in Altoona.
So he is still in Altoona. What will it take for, again, he's still only a person of interest being questioned in the case, but what would it take for suspect status and extradition to Manhattan?
Well, there's a whole process here. It's not like they can just pick him up and grab him. They have to build a case and create a timeline warranting an arrest on these charges. He's now being held in Altoona on potential gun charges, illegally being in possession of this gun. Remember, there are federal laws about ghost guns and silencers, and apparently he was in possession of a ghost gun with a silencer, potentially illegally. That's what they're holding him on now. By now, the NYPD will have gotten to Altoona. They are likely there, and there's paperwork. He has to appear at a summons in Altoona before the extradition happens. The U.S. Marshals are involved. He will be transported.
What would the time frame be on that?
It could be in the next couple of days. Okay. It's unclear, but he's also going to be getting a lawyer. He has a right to counsel, as Rikki Klieman just said. So there are a lot of different parts of this picture that have to come together, and that can take some time, even though the public might think, well, wait a minute, get him back to New York City and put him in front of a jury. But it doesn't really work like that in real life.
You and the Confirmed team have also created sort of an idea of a background of this person of interest. What can you tell us about what you've learned about him?
Well, this is someone who went to good schools and grew up in the Baltimore area. He went to the University of Pennsylvania, an exclusive Ivy League school. He graduated in 2020. He was involved in student clubs. He studied computer science. His most recent address points to Hawaii. If you look at his social media, he was posting lots of pictures of the Hawaii landscape and animals and the like. We are drilling down on his potential anti-corporate mentality and those kind of more extreme views that would push him to carry this out. So far, it doesn't appear that he has a criminal record. We're still working to firm that up.
We have been talking about it, but can you reiterate everything that was found on his person?
Yes, of course. When he was apprehended in that McDonald's in Altoona, he had a bag. He was in possession of a jacket that matched the jacket that he was wearing during the shooting. He had a computer that is now being forensically analyzed. He was in possession of a ghost gun with a silencer, capable of firing 9mm rounds. And police just said at the presser he also was in possession of the very same fake New Jersey ID that was used to check into the hostel on the Upper West Side.
I want to go back to Tom Hanson, who is still outside of New York City Hall. Tom, what has been the reaction to this news that you've been following?
Yeah, well, over the last several days, really what we've seen is kind of a glorification, unfortunately, of this suspect. And as we're looking right now on his Instagram, which we have found, he is gaining hundreds and hundreds of followers almost by the minute. So we are seeing a lot of chatter, a lot of people really honing in on who he is, very curious about any motives. Now, at first look of his Instagram, there aren't any real indications of a motive from the posts. They're pretty mundane. They're from vacation. Some of them are in Hawaii. So we're not really gleaning too many clues on his digital trail, but it is that digital trail, and it's the world that we live in now that led to his arrest. That's what authorities say. They are crediting the public with circulating those images and identifying him at that McDonald's in Altoona. But currently we are watching and monitoring his social media. Obviously, it is not active right now, considering that he is in custody. But we are gleaning through that to see if there are any clues about that ill will toward corporations, which we heard about in this press conference. Of course, we are also going to be eager to learn exactly what is in that handwritten 3-page manifesto, which authorities believe indicates a motive. But this is a person who clearly was resolute in carrying out this crime based on the trail that he led authorities on and the path that he took to get out of New York City as quickly as possible. Tons of questions, Lindsay, still left to be answered. Hopefully we will learn a lot more once we get that manifesto and we can review it.
Tom Hanson, thank you so much. I want to bring in Felipe Rodriguez. He's an adjunct professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice and a former detective with the New York Police Department. Felipe, thank you so much for being here. We heard in the press conference multiple times that at the end of the day, this came down to good old-fashioned police work. We also know that it came down to a tip from the public who had seen the fruits of that labor, the combing of those cameras and images that they were able to release to the public. Break down for us what the last 5 days of the investigation looked like and where this goes moving forward.
Well, at this point now, it's just putting everything ready for prosecution. If it is, the first thing we're going to do is try to get DNA evidence, right? Usually taken from a swab from the interior of your cheeks, because we also had so much physical evidence. We had the book bag, we had the Monopoly money, the jacket that was recovered, but we still have a lot more to go, and that's what people need to realize. We still have to try to recover that specific firearm. The reports that we're getting from Pennsylvania is that yes, he was in possession of a ghost gun, but not the actual firearm that was used in the homicide. It's a very specific and unique gun. So that's why, you're still going to have the divers out there trying to get that. And another key piece of evidence that I like to see would be, getting the bicycle. And then after that, it's going to go into the forensic zone where we're going to try to get any information that we can from a cellular device.
Felipe, are you surprised it took police 5 days?
No, it's once again, I know the public speculated quite a bit. But remember, like I tell everybody, he was out here 10 days in the city. And what did we get? If it wasn't for the hostile picture, we would have had, it would have been a lot harder to ID him. Once again, we can see how the partnership of both the public, the media, and police worked well together. Because if someone hadn't alerted them at the McDonald's, probably still would have been out there. And it was just the fact that no matter how good science is at times and technology, dedicated detectives at NYPD, that's what ends up solving it.
Right. Felipe Rodriguez, Anna Schecter, Tom Hanson. Thank you all so much. Our thanks to Rikki Klieman as well. We'll have more on this on the other side of this break.